All right, everybody, welcome back to the Zoop podcast for another episode. You can check us out. We stream on Wednesday nights. We try to do it 6 p.m. West Coast time. That's 9 p.m. East Coast time on YouTube, on Facebook. You could also find the audio version of this on iTunes, on Spotify. The link to the campaign that we're going to be discussing today is in the show notes. It's in the show description. And if you are watching this right now on YouTube, you will see the link right there at the bottom of the screen. There's also a QR code. So if you're watching this on your laptop, take out your phone and go pledge. And back, the campaign we're going to discuss today, August, Purgatory Underground, Book 1, hardcover art book and collection. My goodness, this is a handful. And here with us today, our very first return guest to the Zoop podcast, Benjamin Morse. How are you, bud?
I'm good. Thanks for having me back.
Absolutely. Thanks for doing. Well, look, thank you for coming back on the podcast, but thank you for coming back on the platform as well with your latest. For those who might not know, Ben also crowdfunded We Are Scarlet Twilight, which was issue number 4, as well as the deluxe hardcover edition of that a few months ago on Zoop. Did incredibly well, and now we're back for another one. So, yeah, we just launched yesterday, August 1st, for the book August.
The August of August.
And I have to ask, I haven't read the book yet, but how did you come up with the name August? This is for your main character, Captain August, right?
Yeah. It was, I had another name initially. I think I was going to call him Frost for a while, and I think someone else took that. It might have been an Image book, maybe 2015 or something like that, and kind of batted around some stuff. And I think I was watching Rome or some documentary about ancient Rome, and they had a character, they had the emperor on there, of course, called Augustus, and thought that's kind of good. It's also the month of my birthday, so I kind of liked it for that reason. And
happy birthday!
Well, thanks. It was a kind of a placeholder name for a while, and I just got used to it and decided to keep it.
Awesome. When is your actual birthday, by the way?
The 19th.
Okay. Well, this campaign will be running through the 19th. It'll be running for the entire month of August for the book August. I thought that was pretty clever. We could talk about real quick, though, Scarlet Twilight. Any updates on Scarlet Twilight that you want to share with people who might be tuning into this, and kind of let them know where you are in the process, and not to worry, and that they'll be getting their stuff. And please come and support August and support Ben as well.
Yeah, so Scarlet Twilight, I think we are looking for digital proofs probably any time now. We had some back and forth with the printer to make sure everybody's on the same page as far as how the inside front cover was going to look and some things like that. I think that's all ironed out, so we're going to get those digital proofs, and we should be off to the races. We just ordered the deluxe editions of some of the other single issues, so those are, I think, being printed right now. So I think we should have an ETA pretty soon, and everything should be going out pretty shortly after that.
Excellent. Good to know. So if anyone is thinking about coming back from the Scarlet Twilight series, I know you had multiple crowdfunding campaigns on other platforms as well, and did number 4 in the hardcover with us. So any of those backers out there, come on, check out August. If you like Ben's work, his writing, his artwork, which honestly, I love your artwork so much, man.
Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, and that's really all I know so far. I backed Scarlet Twilight. I haven't read the book yet, but the artwork that you do, I love how it in this book in particular, there's so many different art styles.
There are, yeah.
And I don't know if they're all incorporated into the story, if they're sort of like pinups, but can you talk about the different art styles that are a part of this?
Yeah, I can. So the book itself, basically the issues 1 through 4 story, have a couple different art styles. We have kind of a flashback scene that is the first 2 pages, and that really is kind of a year-long jump between the real story starting up, and that all takes place. That's all drawn in a pretty modern comic style, which is what you've got on screen there now. As far as the art book's concerned, that's a little more interesting because I had done a lot of pieces, kind of just for fun and promotion, that were based on, say an old He-Man toy box or old comics from the 90s. So I had a lot of different styles in there, and that was intentional, just kind of to have a fun piece to put out in a book like this. In addition to that, there's also a lot of artwork in the art book section from previous versions of the story. I've been working on this for about 10 years.
Wow.
So obviously things have evolved visually in pretty dramatic ways in that time. So you'll see a lot of different looks for characters, a lot of different design, and also a lot of different, you can see, oh, wow, this version of it would have looked like this in terms of style. And a cool thing in the collection is I've got a prequel comic that's 13 pages long, and it's actually comprised of, I would say, 3 different drafts of August Purgatory Underground, and somehow they all work together pretty well. So you get to see those different art styles within one story as well.
And so, I mean, I feel like, most artists have a distinct style that they use no matter sort of like what they're doing. But between Scarlet Twilight and it sounds like even sort of 3 different eras or chapters of August, it sounds like you're changing your art style to sort of meet the story. Is that accurate?
Oh yeah, yeah. And that's, I mean, to me, that's fun. That's, I guess that's not normally the case in a lot of books you read, but in my day job, I started off in an illustration studio. We still do a lot of illustration, and that's just always, hey, this needs to look like the last version of this, instruction manual or something like that. So to me, it's really normal to just be jumping around from art style to art style. And that kind of frees me up to consider different looks for things. I'll sit down with something, maybe a flashback scene and think like, is it a happier time? What's a style that can really, I apply to every story I do. I want to make sure that the art style, really meshes with the story and with the pace that the story's moving. And I think it just gives you another dimension that you can communicate to the reader with. If something looks like an 80s cartoon, you can kind of assume just by looking at it, hey, this was a simpler time. Things were a lot more black and white. When we go to a more modern style, you can see things have really shifted gears, and it's going to be a different world, more or less. So to me, it's pretty natural, and I think it's a good storytelling tool.
And I love that you took, was that like the Marvel Series 3 trading card set that you kind of modeled some artwork after there?
Oh yeah, yeah. Those are really fun to do. I've kind of just been putting together, to include in some of the artwork I put out to promote the book, and obviously a feature in the art book section. But I love not just those cards, which are really nice, the ones I had when I was a kid. One thing I really tried to do with August was I wanted him to feel like he had been around in the 80s and the 90s a little bit. And
Sure.
I thought a good way to do that was to kind of what I was mentioning earlier, where I'd have a part of the story in a different style. It's kind of nice to maybe imagine, and I don't try to lean too hard on the sort of artificial nostalgia of that, but I want to feel like, see some stuff like, oh, that could have had a card series in the 90s that kind of looked like this. It kind of, I hope, just sort of pushes the character into that part of your brain that remembers that stuff, remembers that era, remembers how fun comics were. And I think it's kind of a good way to not just push the nostalgia button a little bit, but also to give the character some history. And a lot of the story deals with people talking about things that have happened, previous to where the story begins. Characters that aren't around anymore, characters that are estranged from one another that you can kind of tell didn't always used to be that way. And it's just kind of another thing I can use when you're looking at the book as a whole to give the characters some history and hopefully give the world itself some history and a lived-in quality a little bit.
Excellent. Yeah. I mean, I'm a sucker for all the nostalgia stuff, right? I mean, I was huge into comics in the early 90s. So when I see those trading cards, to me, it just brings back a lot there. So I think it's very cool. And maybe we need to.
Oh, go ahead, sir.
I was going to say, maybe we need to consider making some actual trading cards.
I think it would be cool. It would be. I will say every time I'd sit down to do one of those, I'd be like, oh yeah, there was this series. And I'd look up, a Google search for that series and I'd probably spend 20 minutes looking at stuff I haven't seen in 20 or 30 years. And think, oh yeah, that one was really cool. I got to do that.
Switching gears a little bit now. I mean, you mentioned working on this for 10 years, this story. And I know that there are more stories with August. And I believe, if I'm correct, I mean, you've released versions of or issues or smaller chapters of August in the past?
Yeah, we published a direct market version in 2022 with Red 5. And this is the collection of that with, like I said, all the other stuff I've done. I started working on this book and the concepts for it in about 2012 or 2011, around that time. And obviously it changed a lot. I didn't start off with what I thought, and thinking in retrospect, wasn't a very good direction. I was kind of trying to just let the story sort of improvise and take its own direction, which worked out about as well as you'd think. And I'd see some things. I was started watching the Doctor Who revival with Christopher Eccleston, and they had a plot point in there where the Doctor had blown up his home planet to save the larger universe. And I thought that's a great idea. In that show they made it so everyone was kind of in awe of him and appreciated what he had done. To my way of thinking, like, wow, I think if that had actually happened, even if someone did something they had to do, people would not be warmly appreciative of that. They would have some problems with it, or they would really be uncomfortable with it. And that's where the story really began to take shape. I thought, what if I took a guy who was kind of a squeaky clean hero, somebody like Luke Skywalker, somebody like Dick Grayson. And
I was gonna say there's a Luke Skywalker resemblance, so I was gonna hold off. Yeah, I was gonna hold off on that. But some of those hero shots that we see, I'm like, man, that is like a Mark Hamill from 1982.
Yeah, he definitely he got Luke's haircut. I wanted him to look like a combination of Luke and Archie from the Archie comics.
Yeah,
I kind of wanted that sort of all-American, very uncomplicated sort of good guy that's a younger hero, and to take him in the direction where not that he's necessarily done something wrong or has become a darker character, but has sort of been through some stuff, gets blamed for some things, and then to see how somebody like that reacts and changes. And it's not really a deconstructionist type of a story. He's still very much a hero, and but I thought it was fun and gave him a lot more dimension and sort of scratched at him and revealed a little bit more character to have made him sort of a controversial figure. You'd see a lot of people hate him. A lot of people are like, oh, I can't believe everyone's so mad at you for this. You get to see a good range of reactions. And that let me really make him a little bit more mysterious in what I hope was a fun way. Everyone has opinions about him, and he's pretty quiet about it for most of the story, and until he finally is in the spot where he says what he thinks about everything that's happened to him too. So it was fun to build to that, and it was fun. It really was fun in an easy way for me to define the other characters in the story.
I just love. I don't think I've ever heard a character described before as Luke Skywalker meets Archie.
It was very obvious to me at the time. I'm not sure.
But I think it works. Just from from the little that I've seen, it seems to very much work. And I know that you do a lot of other graphic design and everything like that. I mean, the cover itself is not like most other covers that you kind of see. And I think the same can be said for some of your other work as well. I mean, the Scarlet Twilight stuff is gorgeous, and I love that the title treatment doesn't really look like anything else on the shelves. So hopefully that helps it stand out from yet another aspect as well.
I hope so. I mean, graphic design is really important to me. I do a lot of it in my day job. And I think to sort of go back to Scarlet Twilight a little bit, one of the main things that made me want to do that book was looking through all the Alex Ross and Chip Kidd books that Chip Kidd had designed. The design of those books just added a whole other factor to, I won't really call it nostalgia, but it gave you a really added dimension that kind of called back to the era that the artwork was invoking. And it just kind of it amplified, I think, what the artwork was doing. And I thought that was a really valuable tool. So that's something when we get to these collected editions, which are a lot of fun, I don't want to just make it look nice necessarily. Of course, I do want it to look good, but I want to use everything I have to convey something, which includes the design, to just amplify the type of story this is. I have a lot of 80s cartoon influences in here, and I really tried to make the design of the book reflect that. So you're just getting, a really, I'd say, like 360 experience, at least as much as I can do that, to kind of put you in the world of this character.
Do you design books for anyone else? Like, has anyone approached you to design their books?
I don't think anyone's approached me. I think somebody asked me once about doing an art book, and it was, I didn't have time to do it at the time. I definitely want to do more of that because, like I said, I love doing logos. I love doing design. And I think I would say about 5 years ago, that was a pretty underappreciated part of comic books. But I've been seeing so much great comic book graphic design in the last year or so that it's really cool to see. And it's made me just think, wow, I really need to step up my game on that.
Well, I think your game is definitely stepped up, but I'm gonna plug you here, and any other creators who are listening who are looking for a book designer, at the very least, reach out to Ben, because he crushes it. Honestly, some of this stuff really is just, in my opinion, so different than other things. This doesn't necessarily look like Man, I'm going to say something, and I don't want anyone to take it the wrong way. It does not look like an indie comic. You know, it looks like a major book. So props to you for that.
Oh, thanks. I mean, it's something I have a bunch of He-Man and Transformer books that are, the art of this, series or that, and they do a great job at design. They make it feel like this is a big league franchise, which of course those are. And I'm kind of coming from sort of trying to catch up in a lot of ways. I want this to really feel like it was one of those cartoons that you remember, like Brave Star or something that wasn't that big, but you kind of would see it like, oh yeah, that guy, he was friends with like a robot horse or something. You have a little bit of memory, but not a ton. And I really kind of wanted to sneak August in there. I wanted the old stuff that I created to go with this to really give you that nostalgia, but not necessarily trip us up with, well, I wanted the story to go back in this direction, or I missed this character. If you look at a lot of stuff they brought back from the 80s, which is almost everything we've seen in theaters now, it seems like,
Yeah.
it's, I think they've created a really impossible task for themselves, because you're going to bring that stuff back, but it can't be the same way it was, and yet that's really all anybody wants to see. And that, there's just no way to win there. So I kind of went at that backwards. I thought, let's take something, make the story relevant on its own, make it modern, make it good, but then go back and use the nostalgic type elements to give that some depth and history. So you sort of feel like, maybe ideally, I hope it feels like that stuff evens out and gives you kind of the experience that you sort of want to have when you go see, Star Wars sequels, or they bring Indiana Jones back another time, or, Star Trek Picard or something like that. There's always people get bent out of shape about that stuff. And I look at the things that people get upset about, like Luke Skywalker in the new movies, for instance. They're like, oh, he went on this island and he was a miserable hermit. And I thought, well, if there was still going to be Star Wars going on, he can't have had a good life. He can't have won. Something had to have gone wrong. So you're really in a corner there when you have legacy characters. And I think that to kind of turn that around, I thought, okay, there's something to be said for that experience. I want something that hints at a deeper attachment. And I thought this would be a fun way to try and do it. Sort of come up with a new story first, and then imagine a previous version of it and use that to fill in the history of the characters. And ultimately, I can hit the ground running a little bit better, I think, with the main story that way.
And speaking of, I mean, the history and the main story, in sort of preparing for this campaign, I saw another August title. And is that something that's been released before, or is that a future work that you're working on? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I can. That's a future work, and there is a little section in this collection that kind of lays out some of the plans for that. There's going to be 4 main stories I'm going to do with August, and the next one I'm going to do, and I posted some artwork online for this that's not too spoilery, but it's going to be called Terminus Mechanica, and it's actually the 4th book of the 4. So the way I had that idea was, I sort of had ideas for this story, which is 1, and then 2, 3, and 4. I found myself, I would just start thinking about 4 much more than the other ones. And I wondered why that was. And I thought, actually, if I do the last one next, I'm kind of giving you August's first adventure and his last adventure. And I thought, as weird as that seems, as counterintuitive as that might seem, I thought it made a lot of sense when you think about how we sort of approach heroes in history. Like King Arthur, he gets the sword from the stone. He dies fighting his son at that, I forget what the name of the battle was, but the Mordred. The beginning and the end of most of these characters, and then if you read another story about them, it's somewhere in the middle. Robin Hood's beginning and his end. I thought that was a cooler way to approach this. My experience when I got into comics in the 80s was reading Batman Year One and then reading Dark Knight Returns. And I know those aren't strictly canon anymore, or I don't think Dark Knight Returns ever actually was.
I can't tell you what's canon at all anymore. Yeah,
it's impossible. It used to be possible, but now I don't think it is. But what I really liked about that as an overall experience is I still had those 2 stories in my head, even when I was reading Nightfall or something like that, or just his regular adventures. It gave everything a little bit of gravity, even if they weren't specifically hinting at, oh, this guy is we're pushing Batman to the state where he's going to be like he was in Dark Knight Returns. They actually rarely did that. But just having that in my head gave everything a lot more context and a lot more, sometimes dread. Sometimes you're just looking for little Easter eggs, but you have a fuller understanding of the character because you have that. And I kind of want to create that with August. I think the second and third chapters, which I kind of have outlined out, will have, I think, a lot more tension, knowing what happens to August and to the galaxy that he lives in, which doesn't work out very well. I think that reading 2 and 3, knowing where he ends up, is going to be a lot more tense. You know that there are some things that are very much in jeopardy that have no plot armor, because you'll have read, where it all ends up at the end.
Can you reveal without it being too spoilery? And if the answer is no, that's totally fine. But what is the time gap between book 1 and book 4 for your characters?
Oh, it's about 50 years. So in this, he's about 24.
Gotcha.
I would say roughly, at least in my head, that's always what I thought. And he's, 50 years older than that in the next one that I'll do. So he's an old man, and it's not too spoilery because you'll see it when you look at the cover. The galaxy has almost been like totally decimated. It's almost like The Walking Dead or something like that, but in space, or Mad Max or something of that nature.
Yeah.
Things have gone really badly, at least for the galaxy at large. And August has been marooned on the planet by himself for a long time. And we just pick up the story from there and fill in what had happened, how things got that way, and who else is still around to fight with or fight for. So that's where he ends up. And I think it's going to be really interesting to, in the middle chapters, see how things get there, how things are starting to go that way for him. So hopefully that's, I don't think a lot of people have done that. So hopefully it'll be interesting.
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like it's a little, Quentin Tarantino of you. It's a little, even a little Star Warsy of you, episodes 4, 5, and 6 before episodes 1, 2, and 3. So I think I don't think we've seen a lot of that kind of tinkering with time in comics. I mean, I like the Batman Year One and the Dark Knight sort of reference, but like you said, is it really canon? Don't know. Is that really where Bruce Wayne is going to wind up? Is that really how Gotham City is going to wind up? Like we just don't know. There's one other example I kind of have of that, though. I don't know if you used to read like the old Valiant comics in the early 90s. They had a book. They had a book called Rise Zero, and that took place in like 4000 AD.
Okay.
So like 2000 years in the future. And in that book, they kind of dropped Easter eggs of what you could potentially expect in the next 2000 years.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So there were.
I read Solar and Magnus. And I know Magnus is no longer part of them, but
Solar, Magnus, and Turok were part of the original Valiant. They got licensed by Dynamite. So Dynamite has actually Dark Horse, then Dynamite. Sorry, I was a big Valiant nerd, so I know all that stuff. But Valiant still has, Exo Manowar and Harbinger, if you remember that group.
Oh yeah, I remember them.
Shadow Man, Eternal Warrior, Bloodshot, all those characters.
Yeah, they had a great series. They were doing some really awesome stuff, and I'm going to butcher the name pronunciation here, but Tomas Giorello.
Oh yeah.
Crossovers, and where I think Livewire was fighting Exo Manowar mainly, and the Harbinger team was in there, and then he drew a series of Exo Manowar that was just hands down some of the most beautiful comic book art I've ever seen.
Yeah, he's pretty sick.
Oh, it's unreal. I can't believe that guy is not drawing every book out there. I'm sure he's doing a lot of cool stuff, but that was, I would say, top 5 books I've ever looked at.
Wow, that's high praise for sure. I wonder if it's because, I don't know if he's American. I wonder if, there's a lot of these foreign artists now that are doing a lot of insanely amazing work, but I just wonder if some of the top publishers maybe haven't caught on yet because maybe they just haven't been at conventions or something in the States. I don't know.
It could be. What I love about his work is there's a lot of great artists out there that Louis LaRosa is doing amazing stuff with, that stuff is unreal. And everybody obviously loves Alex Ross and how mind-blowing stuff was when it came out, and still is. He's still doing stuff that keeps topping himself. I mean, he has not stood still at all. But what I love about Tomas Giorello's work, even though they print the pencils, I wish they had, totally inked versions of that had the depth that the pencils do. But that to me still lives very much in the tradition of, comic book art. It's the blacks are the blacks. There's some sort of rough pencil shading, but he's not leaning too hard on the painted effects. It could work as regular comic book art, and I love that. I really, there's something in me that wants to see the coolest stuff you can see while it's still pen and ink, and then you do your effects on top of that, the computer and everything, but it still could be a drawing on a page. It could be just a black and white ink drawing. There's a comic book fan in me that just always wants to stay within that range, and I think he's one of the only guys that does stuff that stands right up there with the guys that do painted beautiful artwork, but it still is, he's kind of living within the comic book rules, and that's just what makes me, that's what blew me away about it.
Understood. Look, high praise. I echo everything you say about him. I've seen a bunch of his work as well. I want to say he's probably doing some stuff with Bad Idea now.
Yeah, I've seen some pages from that.
Yeah. What's funny is because you're our first guest who's been on a second time now, and I believe that by the time you were on the show the first time, I was already asking my final two questions, which were, who's your dream collaborator and what's your desert island run that you would bring with you, if you only had one book or one comic that you could take anywhere. So for the people who want to know the answer to that, go back to episode, I believe, 7 of the Zoop podcast, and you could hear that answer there. So because we've already done that, I have another couple of questions that I think might be fun to kind of tackle. We spent a lot of time on this episode talking about artists. Mm-hmm. So maybe I'm going to throw out, who is on your Mount Rushmore of comic book artists? Top 4.
Top 4. Okay. Steve Rude, Al Williamson. I feel bad putting him in here, but I'll explain why. Frank Rosetta. And I think the 4th would have to be Jim Lee. Just what represented Jim Lee.
No, who was the second one? I missed the second one.
Well, the second one was Al Williamson.
Oh wow! Okay, cool.
So those Steve Rude and Al Williamson are 2 of my favorites. They were my favorite. They've been my favorites since I was a kid, and I think they both occupy a space that is classic illustration and taking a lot of previous styles and just bring them their absolute pinnacle. If you look at Flash Gordon stuff from the 30s and Alex Raymond and some of the guys that have done that, Al Williamson, when he really buckled down and had time to work on something, produced what I think were the most beautifully illustrated pen and ink drawings that were in the comic book format, that had just classic adventure and also were very much an evolution of previous style. Steve Rude's, I think, the same way. There's a lot of Wally Wood there. There's a lot of Jack Kirby. And I think and a lot of Alex Toth as well. I think he just took all those things. If you were going to look at kind of broadly, slightly cartoony comic book art that's high adventure, Steve Rude has reached the top of that mountain. He is the most perfect expression of that type of comic book. Frazetta I threw in there. I feel a little bad saying that because he only did a few actual comic book stories. They were all beautiful, and he's obviously so much more well-known for his paintings. But I look at those Buck Rogers covers he did in the 50s, and I have to say, of kind of what I was saying earlier, of something that is comic book art and it is just pen and ink, I don't think anybody but Bernie Wrightson has done more energetic, detailed, beautiful images that are just, hey, this is pen and ink, this isn't painted, this isn't using any other tools to get it across. And it's amazing he did that 70 years ago. I still think they're probably the most dynamic, sort of solid-looking covers that have ever been made. So that's why he gets that spot. And Jim Lee, I have to just put on there because I think the image stuff in the 90s was so great. It was hugely defining for me. And I think he's also a guy that took everything happening in an era and kind of was the best expression of that style. He had a decent amount of draftsmanship versus the energy and stuff like that. People rip on Liefeld. I'm a huge Liefeld fan. But you have to concede there are some times where things went a little bit off the rails in terms of proportions or just, line and stuff like that. I love all that stuff. So
sure.
But I'll concede that point when somebody's like, "You like that stuff?" And like, okay, yeah, I do. Jim Lee had all the energy, but there was the polish that he had that Mark Silvestri draws, I think, just as dynamic and in some ways a little bit more, there's more fluidity with his stuff. But Jim Lee's, I think the polish that Jim Lee puts into stuff puts him, like I think is the top of the line of that stuff for me. So I think he's really defined modern comic art. I don't think many people disagree with that, and that's why he's number 4 there.
Like out of the 4, Jim Lee is definitely on my Mount Rushmore. I know Alex. I would put Alex Ross up there too. It's kind of hard to figure out who the next 2 for me would be, because like I think of like overall influence and I mean, like Jack Kirby, for example, maybe would be on many people's Mount Rushmores. My guy's Mark Bagley, but that's like a totally subjective type of thing versus like, well, he did this, and this, and changed the industry in these ways, and that's why he's on there. It's not, he's just like my guy,
Yeah. Al Williamson is kind of like that for me, but what makes me say Al Williamson and not Alex Raymond is he took that and he brought it to the next level. As much as I love Jack Kirby's stuff, and I got into it a little late, I think I was 20 before I really looked at that stuff and thought, there's some cool things here I hadn't quite seen before. And you have to concede in terms of, just being a pioneer.
Yeah.
Really gets it. I almost feel like he's above Mount Rushmore somewhere. It's almost
fair enough.
He's
in the clouds. He's in the clouds above Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, but I feel like when I say Steve Rude, I'm saying like, well, you look at Kirby, Wally Wood, Alex Toth. Those guys were all very different, but there was something about Steve Rude and the way he takes all bits from each of those and just brings it together into, I think, the best version of that era of art. And it obviously still holds up today, but it looks a little old-fashioned. To me, he took those art styles and just kind of mashed them up into the best version of that. So that's why I go with that. It's hard to say Kirby isn't the number 1 there, but
yeah, I know. We'll
some kind of logic to it. Otherwise, it just gets out of control.
Understood. We'll say Kirby is elevated above Mount Rushmore for sure. And now I'm almost scared to ask the final question here. Do you have a Mount Rushmore of writers?
Writers? That's a tough one.
And if I put you on the spot, don't worry about it. We don't have to hit 4 or fill it out. So,
well, I'll say this. I love Alan Moore's stuff. I have to say, even though that some of his later versions of things have been not as well received as earlier stuff, and it's not a very original answer, I have to say Frank Miller. I think he brought a lot, obviously, to comics in the 80s, but I think even his more modern work is still interesting, and I think that there is a pacing that he still has in this stuff. Even Superman Earth One, not Earth One, Year One, still had some very interesting stuff there. As far as people that write things I just track down and really like, I love Mark Millar's stuff. I like what Mark Waid's doing now on World's Finest. That's fun stuff. But yeah, you can tell I'm an artist because I can talk all day about not just who's my favorite person and their style and what came of it, but why I put this person in front of that person. And when you're writers, I'm like, well, okay, let me think about that. So
you got a lot of good picks there, though. Mark Waid, Mark Miller, Alan Moore, absolutely to all those. And I guess just one final thing is give people the pitch, to come support August on Zoop. Let them know where to find it. Let them know where you are online, and tell them why they should be buying this book from you, Ben.
All right. So this book is called August Purgatory Underground. It's kind of we're taking somebody that could have been an 80s cartoon hero and putting him through, I would say, a more modern situation. If you're a fan of 80s cartoons, if you're a fan of Star Wars, if you're a fan of, any of those old things, but when you watch the way they try to bring them back now or reboot them, you feel like it's lost something you really wanted. I think you should give this book a look. I kind of looked at how that goes down and why it happens that way and thought maybe I could switch this around, do a new story, use the nostalgic elements to fill in some backstory and give it that nostalgia and that weight, but also give you a new exciting story and a new look at those I would say those tropes. So I wanted to give it modern artwork, give it a lot of fun, new, surprising directions for the story. But I hope the world has a lot of weight, and I hope it's a world you're going to want to come back to with me because I'm going to be doing it for a long time. What's cool about the campaign we have now on zoop.gg, and it's going to be up the whole month of August, is there's a ton of extra artwork, which is what you're seeing on screen now, from the 10 plus years I was developing this series. You're going to learn a lot more about the characters, some characters you actually didn't see, some promotional artwork like this that I kind of put together, for fun, but also to give the characters some history. There's a lot here. It's going to be over 200 pages, and I think it's a really fun experience. I think it's a fun way to feel like you're reading a new thing, a new version of a thing that you sort of had almost forgotten about. I hope it gives you all the nostalgia of revisiting the Transformers or G.I. Joe or Star Wars, but can still surprise you in ways that maybe those franchises can't anymore. So if you're into that stuff, I think you're going to really like this book, and I hope you'll give it a look.
Excellent. And where are you online, social media wise? Where can people reach out, find you, say hello?
You can find me on Twitter at Was that not the right answer? Benjamin W. Morse.
You had to take a second. That's all.
Oh, okay. It was loading. I can never remember exactly what the exact handle was. I'm with Benjamin Morse _art on Instagram. You can find me on YouTube. I'm just Benjamin Morse, comic book artist. And obviously, you can find me in the book at zoop.gg.
I'm going to expand upon that just a little bit. So for the people listening, zoop.gg/c/August Purgatory Underground. The link is in the show notes. It's in the description, depending on where you're going to watch or listen to this episode. Ben, thank you so much for coming back. We're off to a good start, over 20%, close to 25% after just one day. The early bird special is still in effect for people who are listening to this as we're recording live. So go check it out. Go get a good deal on an amazing looking, gorgeous, well-written, beautiful book by the equally beautiful Benjamin Morse.
Thank you. Very excited.
Chance, take us out, man.